Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Mission Impossible is over. Red light, green light.
Simple game. Is he serious?
Always.
It's much worse than you think.
We're being ambushed. Abort, that's an order. They knew we were coming. Do you read me?
I don't care how he did it. I want to know why he did it.
You're worried about me.
Why you survived.
I'm sure we can find something I have that you need.
No one sent me.
These guys are trained to be ghosts. Let's not waste time chasing after him. Just make him come to us. Find something that's personally important to him and you squeeze. This whole operation was a decoy. think you're very upset.
You've never seen me very upset. This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
That gum always makes me think of, what's the zebra striped gum?
Fruit stripe. Fruit stripe gum.
It always makes me think of fruit stripe because
As it should.
like the two fruit flavors. All right.
I think that's what Tom was thinking about, too. Andy, Mission Impossible. We're doing our Mission Impossible series. Can you believe it? Did you ever think we'd get here?
It's been a Mission Impossible until now when it became Mission Possible.
Possible. Yes. And soon it will be mission accomplished. I'm pretty
Yes.
excited about that. Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder if that's going to be the last movie that they make. We'll know it's the end because it's called Mission Accomplished.
Everybody, just so you know, these episodes will self-destruct as soon as you've listened to them.
Brian De Palma, 1996. Brian De Palma, based on the screenplay by David Kopp and Robert Towne. Story by Kopp and Steve Zalian.
Kep. I believe it's Kep.
Yeah, sure. Kopp, too. But I call him Kopp.
But that's how
because
he likes it.
We have a police joke. We have a police joke where I call him, hey, Kopp. Yeah. So that's what we do.
Oh, boy. Based on the TV show by Bruce Geller, which was one of your favorite shows.
It was not one of my
all
favorite
time.
shows, but I certainly, Jesus, I certainly know the tropes. I've seen enough episodes to know that I was surprised in the movie when they killed Jim Phelps so early. That was a rug pull in this movie that we'll talk about that I did not expect because I felt like Peter Graves was so inextricably linked to this character, and it was famously one of the characters that didn't come in even in season 1 of Mission Impossible. He was the main cast from seasons 2 through the remaining seasons 7, and then came back in the 2-season attempt at a reboot later, which I just loved. I loved that Leonard Nimoy was in it, but in my head, he was in it the whole time and not just 2 seasons, right in the middle of its overall 60s run. And if you'd asked me the 2 people who made it the longest in that series, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that they were Greg Morris and Peter Lupus because I didn't remember them at all. They just didn't go on to become as famous as the other people in my head. Certainly Peter Graves and Martin Landau and Leonard Nimoy, Leslie Ann Warren, Sam Elliott was in it. So it was for me, it was a really fun show that my dad adored. And so it was easy for him to kind of reintroduce that show to me when I was a kid that started coming out on VHS. To kind of get into it. I did not watch it quite as zealously. I haven't seen every episode, but I've seen a pretty good sampling, and I think I know the tropes pretty well. It was also kind of a surprise when this movie came out and we didn't get, they invented this new character of Ethan Hunt, and that character has become so central to the story of Mission Impossible more than any of the other earlier characters.
Because in the earlier ones, was Phelps the Hunt role?
Yeah, right. He was more of an active participant, but there was still the tape sequence, right? The mission, should you choose to accept it kind of stuff. And they had all these other, they had the tech guy and the makeup artist for making masks and stuff. And that was none of that was Phelps. He was still on the team as far as my memory serves, but he was the leader of the team.
Well, I remember one of the big things that changed from the movie or from the TV series, and probably both of the TV series, because it was in the original series was 60s and the 70s, and then they rebooted it in the 80s. But this was not really. This was really kind of the story of Ethan Hunt. It wasn't about a team, and I remember that people who were fans of the show had some complaints about what they did to the whole concept of Mission Impossible, the TV series, because that was kind of a team show. And
yes.
Very quickly, once this film starts, the entire team is killed, except for Ethan Hunt, who has to then kind of go on. And he kind of does over the course of the franchise build a team. Like there are people like Luther comes back, what's Simon Pegg's character, Benji, he kind of remains. And so we do see some of these characters that kind of become part of the team as things go on. But it's interesting how that was such a shift from the whole idea of the series to the movies. And, I don't know. I know it caused some concern for fans of the show. But again, as somebody who never watched the show, it really didn't affect me, but it was something that I have appreciated as the thing has grown over the years, that they have kind of tried to bring that in a little more.
Well, and it's funny, because I think the first movie does a successful job of destroying the team as part of the De Palma intrigue, right? Like, it feels very much like it's supposed to happen that way, even though it felt like a rug pull. Like, it felt like, here's a thing that I thought I was going to get, and now I'm not getting it. It becomes a team movie that is Tom Cruise's team. And that is the thing that this movie, the promise that this movie makes. Whatever you end up thinking of how this movie ends, was it going to be a standalone thing? Like, it didn't feel to me. I didn't walk out of Mission Impossible in 1996 thinking, I can't wait for Mission Impossible 2. I at that point was not expecting franchise material out of, too much in the theater. So it was a surprise when Mission Impossible 2 came out, and we had, some of the earlier characters. Really, we just had Tom and Ving Rhames, but you can start to feel like they're moving in a direction of building a new team, and that played for me.
I couldn't even remember if Ving Rhames was in the second one or not. For some reason, I thought there were a few that he didn't end up being a part of, but maybe I'm wrong there.
Well, there were some that he played such a small part, or like a walk-on part at the end, but he was in. He was in the second one? He was in all of them. He's credited in all of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting, because my memory of some of these movies is pretty shallow, and so it'll be interesting to see. But Ving Rhames is credited in every one of the movies.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so then to that end, he may be the only character that returns in all of the films along with Ethan Hunt.
Because it's not until Mission Impossible 3 that we get Simon Pegg, and he rides it all the way out to the end, right? He's credited all the way through Mission Dead Reckoning Part 2. The other character would be his wife, played by Michelle Monaghan in 3 and 4. She's not represented in 5, but she is back in 6, and nobody knows what's going on in 7 and 8.
Well, and I think in 4, it's really, isn't 4 the one where she's in it, but it's only like in the last scene where he's watching her from afar sort of thing?
That's right. Yeah. It's another one of those, like, just almost an Easter egg.
Well, and that was really funny, because watching this film again, I was thinking about, like, okay, when does he meet his wife? Is this all before this film, or is it between this film and the next film? Like, now I'm going to have to really kind of pay attention to the storyline, because this film certainly does its share of setting up a little romantic triangle intrigue between Ethan and then Claire Phelps, who is Jim's wife and, quote, widow for a time in the film, played by Emmanuel Béart. And it's an interesting element that is kind of brought in here, that is one of the elements of the film that I don't know, I always find it a little weak, the way that relationship kind of develops, because it just seems so far-fetched that she's acting that way immediately after her husband has died. And, I don't know, I kind of struggle with it. I don't know. How did you feel about that?
Wait. Acting what way? Like when she gets back and is with Tom back in their hideout for the first time?
Yeah, clearly there's some romantic draw between her and Ethan, where, she kind of gives him that, there's a point where she kind of gives him a kiss on his cheek, which seems a little more romantic than French, I guess you'd say, or European, where, even after she withdraws and goes into the other room, he kind of like touches his cheek, like, did that just happen? And then later when he comes back after having just had his discovery that Jim was still alive, and he comes back to the safe house, and she's kind of sleeping in that corner, and he comes up to her and, puts his hand on her cheek, and she kind of holds it and starts kissing it. And so there is this romantic draw that she's portraying toward him that I don't know. It was just it was an element of the story that certainly is there. I don't know. What did you think of
Andy,
that?
I have to just forgive me. I have to correct you on some cultural stuff here. You said that this felt more romantic than French, and I just need to disabuse you of that. To the French, there's nothing different. If it's French, it's romantic because they own romance in France. So everything she does is by definition romantic. Now, to your point, my read on it was that she was just playing Ethan the whole time, and that it was all leading up to this ultimate betrayal because she knew Phelps wasn't dead the whole time.
That's
Even
possible.
And there might be another movie in which it's a romantic comedy where it's the trio of Claire and Jim and Ethan, and it's all about their dynamic. Because you're right, and I think even in that opening sequence when Ethan leans over her, and that's that awesome Dutch angle of him and her, and is she dead or is she drugged, and is she going to come back? Clearly, Ethan has a crush on her. Like I'm not saying that that's not true. It feels to me like he's really playing it, that he has the hots for Claire. It feels like Claire and Jim are using Ethan's feelings against him to try to keep him off the scent and keep him moving in the direction they need him moving.
But it's a strange thing. Hey, honey, I'm going to be pretending that I'm dead, and I need you to woo him to, like, why? To what avail? Like, it just seems like I never feel like that's actually being used in a way to misdirect him.
Well,
and that's, I guess, part of my frustration with it. And this is interesting.
Is it because he's too smart, right?
No,
because he's too cagey. That's the thing that's great about this movie, is that he actually is kind of a step ahead almost everywhere, both like physically running away from the, explosions of fish tanks, but also to just stay on the path that Jim wants him on.
Yeah, but I don't know. There is this element of this relationship, and there was even a whole opening sequence of this film that had included much more of a love triangle between these three characters that ended up getting removed. I believe it was George Lucas, of all people, who told De Palma that he felt that it was pushing the film down a direction that it was setting the audience up for the wrong type of movie. And so they removed all of that. But I can't help but feel like there is this strange element going on in this film that does feel like a love triangle. And even building toward the end, when it's like, why does Jim suddenly shoot his wife? Like that, there's no logical reason for that, especially because it seems like they had been kind of working together to kind of do this whole scam with Ethan. And then suddenly he shoots her. And I'm like, okay, why? The only reason is he must have felt there was this something going on between Ethan and Claire. Like, that to me is a plot element that is very confusing. And then, especially once you throw in the idea that Ethan has this wife somewhere, I guess, and again, I just need to see how that plays out over the next couple films. At what point do I feel like that marriage actually happened? Because I can't imagine it would have been before this film.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, to your point, like I can see the world in which that love triangle exists inside this movie, because it makes the sort of end, like where the relationship ultimately ends up, it makes it more powerful when Jim shoots her, demonstrating that he wants to hurt Ethan because of that betrayal to maybe their friendship, because of whatever. The dynamic is different when he shoots his own wife, if he knows that they are in a relationship together, that Ethan and Claire are in a subversive relationship together. And I recognize I'm sort of reaching to make it whole in my head, but I do find that I can see the sort of lenticular postcard of that of the story of her using Ethan enough to make it at least not a huge hole in the way I look at it.
Yeah, it just ends up being probably my biggest single frustration with the film is that whole element. And it's always a sticking point for me, because I never feel it makes sense. And in the context of what we have with the story, I'm always scratching my head a bit.
There's just one scene in the movie that I just don't like at all. And it's not, and it demonstrates sort of where the movie is at its strongest is when they're actually at work, right? When there's intrigue going on, right? And it's when they try to capture the human moments, like the comedy of human moments, that I really struggle with. And I feel like it is the sequence when they're sitting at the table and they're talking about the mission, and then Tom says, "Can we get an espresso machine or cappuccino machine in here?" And they have that exchange, and it is one of the, like, it is just a cringeworthy bit of performance, and I can't stand it. Does that ever stand out to you?
Well, let me just say, there's an element of me that is a little happy that the entire first team dies, because I really struggle with all of them. Emmanuel Barrett as Claire is in there. You've got Kristen Scott Thomas, who I absolutely love in everything that she does. I feel like she's on autopilot throughout this film, like she never quite seems in it. And so that's frustrating for me. Emilio Estevez, uncredited, and I'm not exactly sure why, but he plays Jack. And he, of all of them, I suppose I'm most fine with. And but then he gets killed by, like, who the hell puts spikes in the top of the elevator shaft like that? Like I just, that's an issue.
Like, yeah. Like they were some sort of part of us. Yeah, it was weird. That wasn't good. Yeah.
And then Ingeborg Dopkunite, who is Hannah, is just kind of like, who? It's like, that's the person I'm always like, oh, I forgot there was another person in this. So it's a team that, like that whole opening, I just feel like that is part of my element with it. Same thing that you're saying about the espresso machine. Like, that whole team just doesn't feel like a cohesive team. It feels very much put together just so you can kill some people off with kind of bit players.
That's the struggle. That's also the handoff, right? Like, that's the thing that motivates our principal character, Ethan Hunt, into action, into a new direction. And I think that's all. It's all fine, mostly because it's pretty quick. Like, it's one mission in the film and then it's over, right? Because everybody's dead and Ethan is motivated and there's mystery afoot. And I like that part. To your point, I think I love Kristen Scott Thomas, and I think she's just wonderful. I agree with you a little bit. There's kind of a parade of famous people going on here. I would not have been able to tell you Hannah's name because she was disposed of. The character was disposed of so quickly. I didn't have a problem with Emmanuel Behart being the one that ends up sticking around with Ethan for most of the film. And I love Vanessa Redgrave so much. Like, I think Vanessa Redgrave as Max is a wonderful sort of antagonistic foil for him. It's really great. But the biggest piece is I love the new team so much. I love Ving Rhames and Jean Reno in this movie, even though Jean Reno is actually kind of not on the team. Betrayal. I just love those guys so much that it just feels good. That it's like we hand off one existing team for a new team, and I'm fine with that because it still ends up being kind of a team thing.
Yeah, I think that there is something with the new team that works better. Although even to that end, like Jean Reno never quite seems like, he always seems suspect. And so I don't know if they were intending the surprise turn that he actually isn't a good guy to be a surprise at all, because he just, it always feels, he always seems designed to be a bad guy.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's the setup, right? Is that here we go. Ethan Hunt has to go work with guys who have been deemed bad, right? Like, they're disavowed agents for some reason, and now Ethan has to find a way to try. Of course, one of them's going to turn. They're set up like it's written on the tin. The big surprise is which one.
I don't know if it's a surprise, though. That's what I'm saying. Like,
that's what I was going to say. Is that I think that that's the biggest hang up, is the fact that from the moment they're on the train that Jean Reno is the squirrely one, and I think my hunch is that they're trying to make Ving Rhames' character of Luther more mysterious and standoffish, and make that something that tells at least a portion of the audience, okay, maybe he's the one, he could be the one who's going to be the big betrayer, and the loudmouth Jean Reno is going to be the guy who ends up being by his side. Honestly, it could have gone either way, and I think we could have had the same conversation. But I like both of those guys. So.
Yeah, I feel, I don't know. Jean Reno I always enjoy in films, but I just don't think this is, maybe he's just not given as much for me to really enjoy what he's doing here. Like, I just don't feel like he gets to bring much to the table here. Whereas Ving Rhames, I think, has a little more, and maybe even in such small parts in some of the later films, there's something about this franchise that obviously he's enjoying because he does keep returning.
And I admit, I was a bit bummed when Renault didn't come back, because I feel like, we didn't get anything like we get from him in something like Ronin.
Exactly.
Which is another one of my favorite movies that actually uses him very well to that effect.
Yes.
So, there you go.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the convoluted story a little bit? Because I know this was a huge complaint about the film when it came out. And this was one of those films that underwent a lot of writing and rewriting. And over the course of trying to put the script together, Steve Zalian, David Koepp were involved. They both ended up away from it. Robert Towne was brought in. Koepp came back later to do some rewrites. There was a point, apparently, Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, who we've talked about a number of times over the course of the show, they apparently also had worked on a script. But then when they finally went into pre-production, they didn't really have the script finished. And so they were just trying to design action sequences and figure stuff out. And because of all that, by the time we ended up with the finished film, some people felt like this plot was a little too convoluted, and one of its biggest complaints. I mean, how does the actual structure of the story end up feeling to you as you watch it?
I'm not going to disagree with any of that. And yet, I feel like I've seen it enough times that I no longer worry about those things. That what I'm looking at are the action beat to beat to beat to beat, and kind of celebrating, frankly, the fact that I can go back and watch this movie and see how the scenes up front in the movie are the scenes that are flashback when they rebuild the intrigue. The fact that, Phelps shoots himself. If you go back and look at the little frame, you can see his hand is turned shooting toward himself. It's not somebody else's gun. Like, those little things could have been faked so easily. And it feels like actually what De Palma ended up doing was building a movie that you can, to some extent, retrace back to the beginning and watch how it all unfolded. And I want to celebrate that, because I think in large part, the movie does that well. Now, that is dealing with the team intrigue, the actual acquisition of the knock list, the non-official cover list, and the fact that they have these two lists. I talked to a friend who works in government and about this movie, and said, that list would have been like an Excel spreadsheet. Nobody I would have had high enough faith in this fancy technology that would have been quite, like, they overdid it.
I wonder if they had the same complaints about the email system in 1996.
Yes, right. I'm just glad that they took up like a full third of the screen saying file access or internet, or right? And they were just using Netscape. Oh my God, that was brilliant. That was a really fun bit of throwback. And white, it looked like some variant of the zip disk. You remember zip disks? Those purple disks? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Felt like that.
Zip
or
jazz,
these were little jazz,
all those. Yeah.
These could have been little optical discs in a case, in a carriage.
They were fancy, very fancy,
very fancy, very fancy. So,
do we get to see Ethan Hunt be a magician later in the franchise?
Doing more sleight of hand? I don't remember.
We'll have to keep our eyes open for that.
Yeah, the Ethan Hunt sleight of hand count. So, back to your question, is the story like too clever by half? Probably, but ultimately I end up tracking the acquisition of the knock list to Max on the train, and all of the cell phone like signal jamming and all of that ends up making sense to me. Like, I don't know. How does it hit you? Am I way too forgiving?
No, I suppose that's where I land too, and maybe it's just because like there's the difference between seeing it for the first time in the theater and trying to remember what all the pieces of the story were, and now having seen it a number of times over the course of several decades. And I just have a better handle on the story and like the fake knock list, the real knock list, and kind of the whole understanding of all the different puzzle pieces. And so I end up tracking the story a lot better now. But again, I just wonder if that is just the result of having seen it so many times.
Yeah.
But I just don't find it to be that confusing of a story.
Yeah, I don't think I do either. I think I think complaining about it is just like, you know what, watch it again. And that's true of so many spy movies that I don't, that's not really a fault.
That's an interesting thing with the complaint, period, because you want these stories when it is kind of a spy movie, especially when it's called Mission Impossible, to feel like there are a lot of threads that you have to track and you have to kind of weave this fine line. And I mean, geez, we've done a John le Carré series on this show and talk about a person who crafted spy stories that were fairly convoluted. And you really do need to make sure you're paying attention so that you can track all the different threads and how everything connects. And to a certain extent, I guess that's where I land with this, is I feel like, you know what, the story feels like it fits into the genre properly. And so I guess that's why I feel I'm okay with it.
Well, and that's why I think it's important to at least shout that out for this movie, because once we move from this movie to the others, I end up feeling like this Mission Impossible is not about spycraft, which this movie celebrates, right? Fantasy spycraft, to impossible stunts and action sequences that vastly outweigh the level of like search and intrigue to the movie. So that's just something that I'm really considering, because it's been a long time since I've watched this movie, the first one in the series. I usually go back to the later films in the series because they're such spectacle. And watching this one reminded me that that the whole series comes from, a fun fantasy spycraft series. And it kind of evolves away from that.
Well, yeah, and it'll be interesting to see, because, I mean, even like Martin Landau, who was in the original show, as we said, they asked him about this. I mean, most of the cast who had been around for the TV series was pretty negative about the movie because things we've talked about. They made Jim Phelps a villain. They killed off the team. And then Martin Landau said this. It was basically an action-adventure movie and not Mission. Mission was a mind game. The ideal mission was getting in and getting out without anyone ever knowing we were there. So the whole texture changed. I think that speaks to kind of the idea that we have with this. And we do have some of them where it does feel like there is some of this getting in, getting out sort of element within the story. But largely it feels like, and from this point forward, they really are moving down to a thing of like, let's chase the bad guy. Let's deal with these trades with these villains. And it does start taking on kind of a James Bond sort of feel, more so than a story about secret missions.
Yeah, and it definitely becomes more about that sort of human level of betrayal, not just like gamesmanship, but here are two teams that trust one another, and they're going to go against one another. And that was the original Mission Impossible. And this one is, here are two teams that trust one another, and within each of those teams are more questions of trust and betrayal. And it feels to me like the spy thriller version of what we complained about in some recent films talking about zombie fare, where eventually it ends up being stories about how mean humans are to each other and no longer about the zombies, because we figure that part out. So now let's talk about raiders and bandits and guys with baseball bats with barbed wire on them. And that's kind of what we're doing here, right? It's like, oh, now I have to be afraid of my friends. That's the parallel for me in this movie. And for some reason, it works better, but only because they get it out of the way early. I don't recall this level of kind of internal team struggle. Once Tom Cruise and Ving Rhames have a relationship together, they stick it out through the duration of the movie. Same thing with Simon Pegg. Like, we have a team that I feel like I count on when I think about Mission Impossible that exists to do things together. They busted up with Jeremy Renner, but... Well,
I will say what they've decided to do, though, with the franchise as a whole is constantly have internal issues, though. Like the IMF, there are always issues with people in the IMF, and suddenly these organizations don't trust each other, and it's constantly, that's the whole thing when you get to Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Fallout. It's like Angela Bassett's character, they are working actively as a different organization to stop the IMF and stuff. And so it becomes... They kind of keep this level going. And so it's interesting, like starting right here, you already have, Kittredge as this character who is, there is this internal level of issue that they're trying to deal with as they're trying to track down the mole within the organization. And I feel like that becomes such a huge part of this franchise throughout. And I wonder if that speaks actually to again, I don't know enough about the series, but it was 60s, 70s. So there's definitely this Cold War vibe with the show. And I wonder if it's just kind of the nature of the times in which it was made. By the time the movie was made, the Cold War wasn't a thing. And so they were looking at different things going on in the world and looking internally, things like that. Like where are we looking now for these stories to take place?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The fact that, wherever there is mistrust, as long as we aren't united against an enemy, then we'll unite against a new enemy. And if that enemy is inside, so much the better for, the story. Which again is fine. I think so much of this movie hangs on the charisma that Tom Cruise brings to Ethan Hunt, and I'm okay following that. I'm really okay following that.
Yeah. As outside of the team, Kittredge does play a pretty big part. And interestingly, he is coming back in 7 and 8 in both of the Dead Reckoning films.
How excited are you about that? Were you excited about that?
Well, I think that's very interesting, especially because one of my favorite scenes in this film is really the aquarium scene between Hunt and Kittredge. The way that De Palma shoots that is it's so interesting, like with such interesting Dutch angles. I mean, I can't wait to talk a little bit more about what De Palma is bringing to this film, because I just think there's insane style going on that he's throwing in. But you get these great Dutch angles that really play up the suspicions that each of these characters has toward the other, as Hunt is looking around the restaurant and realizing or revealing to us that he recognizes everybody in the restaurant as other IMF agents that he had seen throughout the night, and finding out that Kittredge actually has pinned him as the mole. And so you get this really fantastic conversation between the two of them that builds to the point where Hunt throws the gum at the aquarium glass and blows all the glass out of this place and floods the place and makes his escape. That sort of scene is exhilarating. And I think Kittredge plays a really interesting pseudo villain of the story. And that's something I really love about him as a character, is he's the director of the IMF. He's seen kind of as the antagonist for Ethan, but that's only because he thinks Ethan is actually the mole. And it builds toward that great moment on the train when Kittredge actually brings down Max. What did you think of Henry, how do you say his name? Henry Czerny?
I think it's Czerny, yeah. But that's what he allows me to call him that. So
yes, right.
Since you don't know better, let's go with that. Okay. I feel like it is a great representation. Speaking of that sort of the transition to the 60s, Kittredge represents that sort of spycraft cynicism that comes into the storytelling, and that is like he's the pivot point around the question of who do you trust. And I love that scene so much. It's incredibly well written. Like the dialogue is fantastic. And the Kittredge turn when he's trying to, quote, debrief, but ultimately, once he reveals that he's not going to get away from this conversation without acknowledging and confronting Ethan, because Ethan does know that there is more going on and recognizes all the agents, and the architecture of all the agents is actually displayed perfectly for us. All the little flashbacks of recognition are perfect, and we're in the movie. All of that is such a fantastic turn for him. Like it reminds me just how much of a jerk bureaucrats are, right? Like but in a way that feels good. He's given something for Tom to go up against and also with, right? Because he's just trying to prove to the IMF that he is not a criminal. That's what he has. That's the whole plan, is I just have to convince this idiot, this guy, this bureaucrat, that I'm not the bad guy, but there are bad guys out there. And I'm in for those kinds of stories. So I think Henry Czerny is fantastic. It is one of the things that I am most excited about for the Dead Reckoning 1 and 2, that he's actually credited in both movies, indicating to me maybe he's got a part of some significance. And after having all these guys from, Alec Baldwin and Angela Bassett, like Anthony Hopkins, come in that chair, I think it's fantastic that we end up coming back around to Henry Czerny somehow in this movie. I can't wait.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how he's used in those films. And
like his, what do you think of his just general vibe, his performance? Like, he's so quotable because of just how he performs this thing.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why I love him in this role, because he's a great faux foil for Ethan to kind of go up against over the course of the film. And I like anything from like that dinner scene or that scene when they're at the aquarium to like I love the way that the scene plays out when Ethan and his new team are breaking into the CIA headquarters, and he's there. Kittredge is there in another room with Dale Dye, who's kind of his right-hand man, and only to discover, too late, that Hunt has actually broken in and stolen the real knock list, and then ends up like, sending the guy that to where Siberia or wherever. I don't know. I loved the way that he played the character, and I'm excited also to see how he's used in Dead Reckoning.
Yeah, me too. And it's been fun to kind of watch him, like to go from this movie. The next time I saw him, I'm sure the next time I saw him was the ice storm in 97. But then he goes on to Clear and Present Danger.
That was before this.
That was before this. That's the
94.
connection I was making. It was that it felt like he was going from one bureaucrat to another, and it was the same guy. Like, it was so easy for me to transpose his general authoritarian vibe. He owns those kinds of roles. So,
and he was just in Scream 6.
Yeah, he was the doctor.
Yeah. So he's great. But I do you want to talk about any of the other cast, or can we talk about Brian De Palma?
We can talk about whatever you want to talk. It's your special day, Andy. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
I just want to talk about Brian De Palma a little bit, because he's such an exciting filmmaker, and he is a filmmaker who realizes that there's more to making a movie than just cutting back and forth between two characters in kind of standard ways and just set up the camera here and then we'll do a reverse shot here. He actually finds ways to play with the camera and do things in such interesting ways. And we've talked about him a number of times on the show. I mean, he loves doing, he doesn't in this film, but he loves doing, split screens where you've got two things happening at once. He loves doing split diopter, which we do get
he does do in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. We get some fantastic, as I already mentioned, some fantastic Dutch angles that he really uses to great advantage over the course of the story to just shift the vibe of a scene to suddenly give us a little more suspicions. Also, some interesting POV use when we're looking through people's eyes that are using the special glasses, for example, that they have, the camera glasses. Those POVs of the glasses also are used in interesting ways, plot point wise, like when John Voight as Jim Phelps, when he gets shot on the bridge, but he's actually, pretending to shoot himself, and he's having to stage this whole thing through his glasses, knowing people will be watching, in a way that it looks like he's shot. He doesn't see the shooter. He's got all this blood. And then later when we see him performing it, we actually see how he's doing it in a way to keep his glasses from capturing any of the stuff that he doesn't want people to see. And so, I don't know. I found the way that that De Palma was playing with camera throughout to be just incredibly exciting. I loved all of the design of scenes. So what did you think about De Palma as the choice for director for this?
Well, I think it was great. And, I'm pretty hot and cold on De Palma, but this is one I really like a lot. And I think to that point, that POV point, I kept thinking of the sequence where they first go in to intercept Galitzin, where they're at the big fancy political event. And it's the first time Tom Cruise, we know he's going to put on the makeup because we've just seen an interview of his target, and it's obviously Tom Cruise in the makeup, but we see him on the screen. And so, later, our entire introduction to Tom Cruise is through that POV, walking through and being introduced to famous people, and eventually Kristen Scott Thomas. And we see him continuing to look around. And that shot is really great. Like, it's a great way to introduce us to the intrigue of makeup that is such a standard, kind of Mission Impossible trope now. So I love it. The other thing that I don't think you said was macro. I mean, the number of shots that go in super close to eyes and sweat and glasses, and let's give the viewer a sense of detail that normally we don't get on these kinds of movies. And I think it was it is used with such style. I mean, this thing is practically a comic book, the way it's portrayed, and I'm here for all of it.
My favorite use of that actually is a funny one, but it's when Claire is sitting next to William Donlow. That's the guy who goes into the room, right?
Yeah.
When she's sitting next to him, like in the cafeteria, and she, like, I don't know, doses something in his coffee with her pen, but then she puts something on his back, and it's like this little tab to track him. But I just love the way that plays because she does it so covertly, and it's almost like he senses something has happened, and but she moves her hand down in time, and then he looks over at her, and she just looks at him and smiles, and he just thinks pretty girl's smiling at him, and the way that whole scene plays, I don't know, I find it a little bit of like perfectly magical, the way that everything is timed with all of that, and you get that macro shot of the tracker on his back. It's just like those little bits, I think, are just played so well throughout this one.
Yeah, I think so too. And insofar as De Palma is not somebody I think of as doing heavy effects movies, this movie actually holds together in terms of the way they architect some very early, compositing and virtual sets and CG artifacts that they throw into this movie. So, I mean, I feel like I notice it, but it doesn't. There's nothing in here that really takes me out of the movie. What do you think of how he handles some of these pieces?
Well, again, I think he's a filmmaker that knows how to use the tools. So, like, we see things that feel authentic, but I think that he plays with the visual effects in ways that help us buy it. Like, there's a scene where, toward the end of the film, you see Jim sitting in that back cabin, like the baggage car on the train, and Claire is talking to him, and it looks like Jon Voight, but then he reaches up, grabs his face, and pulls it off, revealing Ethan Hunt underneath. And the only time that I look at that and I say, I can tell it's a visual effect, is the way the face looks as the mask is being pulled and stretched and pulled off. But before that, it looked like Jon Voight. Afterward, it looks like Tom Cruise. Like, they do a great job of capturing Jon Voight's essence on the mask before it's pulled off. It's just when it's coming off, I'm like, it's a little wonky, but it's never done in a way where I am too distracted by it. And I don't know if that falls to the visual effects or like to Rob Bottin, who we love as a makeup artist, makeup effects, and the way that he actually crafted the masks to begin with.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And that is the principal sort of CG human interaction reveal that you notice because it's in a dramatic sequence, not to take away anything from the massive train sequence that was all done, with a combination of blue screen and miniatures and wind generators and all of that stuff, which is exceptional. It's just an exceptional action sequence. I really like the train stuff, the high-speed train stuff. I think it all plays, but the stuff, it's the smaller things that I notice. The other one that feels of its time is the knife falling from the vent to the table below. Yeah, it's just a little shiny. It just reminds me of some of those early toaster graphics that I feel like were kind of highlighted in work done on the early Amigas and next generation type compositing effects, and so that stands out to me a little bit. The texture isn't quite finished, but the rest of the movie is just really, really strong. And so I love it. And we get some principal stunt work from Tom early on that demonstrate what a physical actor he is and is going to continue to be. That obviously the rappelling scene where he falls and doesn't touch the floor is extraordinary and hurts my core.
Well, and I think that speaks to, this is really the first time that Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner had decided to come together and produce. This was the story that they chose to tell, with their first time working together as producers to make this film. And I think that one of the big things that Tom Cruise really wanted to do, aside from being the lead character, of course, But really, in an action film like this was his chance to really push himself and start saying, I want to do as many of my own stunts as I can. And when you see all that stuff of him hanging there, it really is him doing all that stuff and figuring out the counterweights and whatever he had to do to make it work so that he could hang properly from that suspension line coming down. And it's just, I mean, it's so exciting to see. And that's in also just speaking to kind of like the sound design in a film that's designed in a scene that's designed to be as quiet as possible because you can't have the decibels over a certain point. They do such a great job of making the sound in there like just room tone with such small, subtle sounds that you hear as he's moving and everything. It's exceptionally crafted, and that should stand out as one of the great action sequences because it's so exciting to see the way they do it and the up and down and everything that he does, the accidental almost drop, the sweat dripping. When I always struggle a little bit about like, how does his hand fit in such a narrow space to catch that sweat? But it's all such a well-crafted scene that I don't have too much of an issue. And so by the time we get to the knife falling, I really just don't worry about it too much because I just feel like it has been such a thrill to kind of watch that scene take place that I'm okay with that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
My biggest issues with it is the fact that they have this whole pretend fire truck in and out as their way to get into the CIA headquarters. I'm just like, that's the part I always roll my eyes at. I'm like, seriously, is this really how, like, I don't think that that's how the CIA, that how they're so loose that a fire truck could just pull up. And like, I always struggle a little bit with that.
You know what? I don't even think about that part. For me, it's the it's the alarm bit. Like make the right alarm go off, and the guard's like, "Oh, now it's level 21. Let's go in there now." It just feels like, yeah, I don't know. It just feels like there are more sensors in there than just a flashing light. Like something is gonna. They have cameras. Maybe there's a camera that shows there's fire there. So there's a little bit of that extension of disbelief to get them into the CIA. But so what? Because once they're there, it's fantastic. Do you think, is there a world in this massive multiverse, Andy, where the CIA at Langley is crawling with rats in the vents?
That was another thing I wrote in my notes, and it's just like from the time I first watched this, I've been rolling my eyes at the fact that there's this convenient rat walking through the air ducts in this particular film in this moment in time. Always makes me roll my eyes. It's very much Chekhov's rat in the vents. That
is it really even Chekhov's rat? Because we never had the rat before. It was never introduced before. It's like De Palma's rat.
Yeah, it's just like, let's just put this rat here because we need a reason for the drop to happen. It just it's a little wonky. I crack up, though, in that brief moment where Krieger drops Hunt. He has time to reach over, kill the rat, and then grab the rope before Hunt touches the floor.
Because he's a superhero. Krieger's a superhero. Antagonist, spy boy. So, overall, the movie plays for me. Is it a perfect film? No, but watching it this time, I was super satisfied because I feel like it was more of a movie than I even remembered it being. Like, I had a really good time watching this movie, and it reminded me just how much I love all these movies. So, it plays.
As far as the stuff with the train, just talking about like the final sequence, because I mean, this film has some really great sequences, and obviously the CIA break into Langley is one of the most exciting ones. You already talked a little bit about the stuff on the train, but I just have to say how thrilling it is to kind of watch the bits on the train. And I know they had to get like this massive fan to kind of create that. I think it was like 140 mile per hour winds that they have blowing at them as they're kind of climbing across the top of the train. I love the way it looks because it feels so authentic watching Tom Cruise and Jon Voight climbing on this train and just like being blown all over the place. It just is a thrill to kind of watch the two of them, deal with, maneuvering up there. I think that's an exciting way to kind of play that whole scene.
it's one of those first sequences where you hear like the legendary stories of Tom Cruise's physical prowess, which is like he gets flipped up over on the train in the wind on that set and jumping from the helicopter, smashing into the back of this train. And he does it over and over and over again. And the stories are like, this guy is covered in bruises and cuts and he's bleeding. And after every single take, he goes over and he watches the playback, and then he goes back up and says, let's do it again, and does it over and over and over again. And that has become part of his narrative. Like that's he's the Baba Yaga of he's the John Wick, right, of making movies.
Yes.
He's legend now, right? That's what they call him.
Pretty much. It is a thrill to kind of see, some of the stuff at the end with the red light, green light, the helicopter stuff. Speaking of visual effects, some of the explosion in the channel looks a little wonky, but none of it so much that it ever takes me out of the film. I still have a fun time with it and enjoy it. And I also laugh about the way that it always plays on the news, like a helicopter suddenly lost altitude and ended up inside the channel.
Flying inside the channel. And they don't talk about the fact that it's going to take 6 months at least to rebuild the parts of the channel that were destroyed by this fiery aircraft explosion inside of it. And, also everything's flooded. And, also, like, it was fantasy spy movie.
Yeah. There will be a few faces that we see later, other than Kittredge, who we've already talked about. But we'll just have to keep an eye out, because one of Max's people ends up coming back as a contact later. And I'm not sure if it's the same character or not, but I know, is it the Die Hard one? I don't think it's the Die Hard one. I think it's the other one, right? There's the one with the long hair is the Die Hard one. Like, he's one of the the bad guys. Is it him?
Or is it the short hair guy who was sitting next to Max actually on the train?
No, it is the Die Hard one. Okay, so the Die Hard one, Andreas Wisniewski, he actually comes back. He's Max's henchman here, and he will be back in the fourth film, Ghost Protocol, as the Contact.
Oh, outstanding.
But I wonder if it's the same character or not. We'll have to try to remember that when we get to Ghost Protocol. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, very much.
The Fog's Contact.
Yeah.
So he goes from Max's companion to the Fog's Contact.
Because he's not sitting with Max. Like, he's on the train. We see him because he's the one that Kittredge sees, and Kittredge starts following him to the bathroom, and that's when they're knocking on the bathroom where Luther is hiding. But so he goes off. But when they are at the end, when we see Kittredge and Luther taking Max into custody, she's sitting with her other henchman. Not this guy, I don't think.
Short-haired guy.
Short-haired henchman, not long-haired henchman.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy might have gotten away, and now he's the Fog's Contact. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, it's a whole industry. Look at his LinkedIn profile.
Hey, what did you think of the music here? So this was Alan Silvestri had actually been contracted to write the music, and then after recording like 20 minutes or so, Tom Cruise, who again was producer, canned him and brought Danny Elfman on, who only had a few weeks to do the score. And so largely it's his own stuff, but of course he does use some of Lalo Schifrin's original theme from the TV show. But what do you think of the score and how it works in the film?
The notable stuff for me was the Schifrin original theme.
Always
right?
Will be,
and and I think that's one of the things actually that the movies tend to have some fun with, right? We'll hear other variants of how they continue to introduce and evolve that theme and play with it. For me, it's fine, but I'm an Elfman fan. Like, I like the music that Danny Elfman produces. This doesn't feel over the top like comic booky. It feels in universe to me, this score, more than some of his other stuff. Definitely shows, just what a sort of adaptable composer he is, because he has such a tone when working with like Tim Burton. And this doesn't feel like that to me. This feels like bespoke to this great spy action movie. I think it plays. Are you in the bag for Elfman like this too? This version of Elfman?
Oh, I love Elfman, and this score, while I don't think it's my favorite of the Mission Impossible scores, what I do love about it is that he does kind of craft some great themes for it, and in particular, my favorite piece of music in the film is actually the one where Phelps has revealed that he's alive to Ethan in the train station. And then they're in like a little coffee shop. And this is after the point where Ethan has found the Bible that has the stamp for the Drake Hotel in it, realizing that Phelps is Job and that he's actually the mole. And so as Phelps is talking about how Kittredge is the mole, you've got that fantastic scene of Ethan putting all the puzzle pieces together, talking about Kittredge, but in his head, he's replaying all the scenes that we've seen before with Phelps. And so he's piecing the whole story together as to how Phelps did all of this in a way where you don't realize. And that the score there is just, it's a fantastic track. I love the way that it plays. And I think Elfman captures that moment well. I think that's a well-directed, well-acted scene. It's just one of my favorite sequences of the film.
All of the above. I think I'm glad you brought up that sequence. I had forgotten that one. That is again one of this sort of architecture of the reveal that works so well in this movie that so many spy movies get wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be right back, but first, our credits.
The next reel is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson, music by Jacob Pietras, Oriol Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. All right. This is kind of a sequels and remakes conversation.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's the TV show that we've talked about. But did you know that there was a Mission Impossible movie from the TV show?
Right. It didn't. I don't think it wasn't released everywhere as a film, was it? I think it was just in a couple of countries.
Yeah, and it was a couple. We've talked about things like this in the past, where it was a few episodes, like they released it as a couple episodes. So yeah, it's interesting that it's just one of those things. And I know that Paramount had been trying for a long time to figure out what they could do with this franchise, but that was one of them. And then to the point where they even tried to release another or make another movie around, like right before they did the 1988 TV series revival. There was a movie that it was going to be a reunion of everybody called Good Morning, Mr. Phelps, Mission Impossible, the movie, but its budget got so big that they never were able to actually make that one.
I never saw Mission Impossible versus the Mob. And so
such a great title.
I have to tell you, after this conversation, I don't think I'm going to go seek it. But yeah. That was it. So, but obviously, this is a conversation about a lot of movies that we're going to talk about immediately.
Yes.
So,
yes,
beyond those things. How did it do at awards season?
It wasn't a big awards movie. It was just kind of a blockbuster. And, those aren't always seen as awards films, but still it was popular enough to get 3 wins with 17 other nominations. Interestingly, over at the Razzies, it was nominated for Worst Written Film grossing over $100 million. What a strange category for them to have. I guess they're just talking about crappy blockbusters. But this film lost to Twister, which, I suppose in the context of them, I would probably also give the Razzie. At the Saturn Awards, this was nominated for Best Action Adventure Thriller, but lost to Fargo, which is interesting that it fits into that category,
weird.
But I guess I can see it. This film was nominated for the MTV Movie and TV Awards Best Action Sequence for the train and helicopter chase, but lost to Twister for the truck driving through the farm equipment. Over at the PGA Awards, Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner actually won the Nova Award for Most Promising Producer in Theatrical Motion Pictures. So, it had... It got some recognition, but largely I think the box office take was probably the biggest award it could get.
Well, then let's talk about that. How did it do at the box office?
De Palma lit the fuse for this franchise with a budget of $80 million, or $153.6 million in today's dollars. The movie was a big Memorial Day header, opening Wednesday, May 22nd, 1996, ahead of the big weekend, opposite the Zucker-Leslie Nielsen spoof Spy Hard. This handily took the number one spot, bumping Twister out of the way. Because of the busy summer schedule, it only held the spot for 2 weeks before getting bumped to number 2 by The Rock, then number 3 by The Cable Guy, etc., etc. This did stay in the top 10, though, for 9 weeks, and played in theaters for 31 weeks, going on to earn almost $181 million domestically and $276.7 million internationally, for a total gross of $878.8 million in today's dollars. This ended up being the third highest grossing film of the year behind Independence Day and Twister, landing with an adjusted profit per finishment of almost $6.6 million. Sounds like mission profitable to me.
I see what you did there. That was clever, Andy. Is it safe to say, do you think, like, what's your hunch in terms of, have you already done the numbers for the rest of the movies? Are you that far ahead?
Yes, I have done the numbers.
Do they just get more profitable over time, like in terms of APFM?
Do you want...
I kind of don't want to. I want to.
Yeah,
because I think I just want to be surprised a little bit, but I'm just that my hunch is they get more. Is there a movie that is less profitable in the run than others around it? That's the question. I don't think they do. My hunch is they all get more profitable.
Well, if you're talking about profitable or adjusted profit per finished minute, because profitable really boils down to the profit to cost ratio.
Yes, and I'm talking about, I'm shorthanding APFM, I should just say APFM, because I know how complex that calculation is, right? That it takes in, how long the movie is in addition to everything else that goes into it. So I'm very curious.
Well, I will say, oftentimes in franchises, it goes downhill. Like, it starts high and then it kind of continues dropping. And it really, even in the case of, overall, profitability, oftentimes you'll find that the first film is the most profitable, even if the other ones are all still profitable as well. So not giving anything away, but something that certainly we'll talk about over the course of the next 6 episodes.
Okay, well, here we go. The train has left the station. The Mission Impossible train has left the station.
It's stuck in the tunnel.
It's stuck in the tunnel with John Woo.
Oh, that's right. It's a fun one. I'm looking forward to revisiting all these films and talking about them all. Should be a great time. So we'll be right back for our ratings. But first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, John Woo's Mission Impossible 2.
Agent located. Identity confirmed.
Good morning, Mr. Hunt.
Sorry I barged in on your vacation.
Well, Mr. Hunt, I don't quite know where to begin.
You know me?
No. Should I?
She's got no training for this kind of thing.
But to go to bed with a man like him, she's a woman. She's got all the training she needs.
Welcome to Australia, mate.
This ain't funny.
The mother of all nightmares is on the loose.
I don't think I can do it.
I mean, it'll be difficult.
Very.
Well, this is not mission difficult, Mr. Hunt. It's mission impossible. Difficult should be a walk in the park for you.
You gotta be kidding.
This message will destruct in 5 seconds.
Letterboxd, Andy. You've heard of Letterboxd. It is our favorite social network for movie lovers. But keep your watch diary up there, your watch list, things you want to watch, make your own lists, rate, review, read others' reviews. It's really fantastic. We love it. And it does have a paid upgrade where you can remove ads and know that you are supporting the Kiwi team that makes this thing happen. And they've given us a code to share with you. And that code is NextReel. What happens is you go to the upgrade page and you can sign up for a pro or patron account. Use the code NEXTREEL at checkout. It'll knock off 20% from the total bill for your annual subscription. It does work for renewals as well. If you can't remember that, just go to thenextreel.com/letterboxd. We've put together a little URL there. It'll whisk you over to the checkout page with the discount already intact. Andy, what are you going to do for MI1?
This is a fun film. I have a good time watching it. I end up struggling with some of the characters and the elements, as I already kind of discussed here, like the little love triangle element of the story. I always kind of have issues with. It has some of the characters in this film are some of my least favorite of the franchise, but it's still better than the worst film in this franchise, which we haven't gotten to yet. I feel like last time I watched this, I gave it a 3 stars and a heart. I think I'm going to go to 3.5 for this one, because I do really enjoy a lot of the sequences.
Yeah, I think so too. It's funny. This is when I went through and first rated Mission Impossible. This was when I first joined Letterboxd, and I wasn't giving star ratings to everything. I was just marking them as watched. And so I hadn't ever given it stars or hearts or anything. And so this will be my first star heart watch, and I am at 4 stars for this movie. It is there are issues that I have with it. Those aren't deal breaker movies. This is in its class. It is for sure one of the better ones, and I get a lot of joy out of watching Tom Cruise do his thing on screen. So 4 stars and a heart from Pete.
Well, that will give it the average of 3 3/4, which will round up to 4 stars and a heart over in our Letterboxd account. And don't forget, you can visit thenextreel.com/letterboxd to get your patron or pro membership, who works for renewals as well. So what did you think about Mission Impossible? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel in our Discord community, where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd, give it to Andy.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
What are you going to do?
I'm going 1/2 star.
1/2 star? Wow.
Yeah, I thought it'd be fun to look
really
at the bottom
low.
of the
You're
barrel.
going to the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay. All right. Well, what do you got?
I have a 1/2 star by Jules, who has this to say. Misleading. Mission was possible.
Okay, I've got that same vein. 3.5 stars. This one from 24 Frames of Nick, who says, if Tom Cruise wasn't so weird, he'd be the coolest guy to ever exist. I'm sorry. I've decided as a result of this, I'm going to start apologizing for everything I say. I'm sorry. Thanks, Letterboxd. I'm sorry. It is hard to believe we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you, and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
The Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals links to the source material from all of our adapted film discussions. Purchasing through our links support the show at no extra cost to you.
In Season 12, the focus was big franchises and series. We covered both Paddington films, adapted from the beloved children's book character created by Michael Bond.
Oh, I love those films so much.
Hugh Grant is perfect.
For our Pitch Perfect series, the first film was adapted from Mickey Rapkin's nonfiction book about collegiate a cappella competitions.
It's like a short story of my life, literally. I lived college a cappella.
Sing it, brother.
I lived college a cappella.
I didn't mean literally.
You know who you're talking to, right? The Twilight Saga dominated the season with 5 films adapted from Stephenie Meyer's vampire romance novels, Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse, and the two Breaking Dawn parts.
Dominated with awkward romance and nonsense logic is more like it.
That too.
Another Thin Man brought us back to Dashiell Hammett's only Thin Man sequel based on other Hammett material, The Farewell Murder, that wasn't just based on the characters from the first film.
We talked about Trainspotting and its sequel, T2, Trainspotting, adapted from Irvine Welsh's novels.
I hate the sequel's name.
I do too.
And the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy adapted from J.R.R. Tolkien's epic fantasy series.
Love these.
Extended editions all the way, baby.
Plus, all the Mission Impossible films based on the 1960s TV series.
And we've still got at least one more to go.
Members got to hear us chat about The Hustler and The Color of Money, adapted from Walter Tevis's books.
Get all of these books and more at our originals page, thenextreel.com/originals.
Start your next read from the movies we've covered at thenextreel.com/originals.